guys, the first video went over the function of the super safety and how it works. So in this video, I'm going to go over the issues you can have when putting a super safety into your AR-15 or AR-9. The first issue, and one of the main issues that people have, is the trigger. Now, if you don't modify your trigger correctly, or if you buy a trigger that's incorrectly modified, by incorrect I mean too much material has been rounded off of the left side of the trigger, then the super safety is never going to reset your trigger. Therefore, you won't have those quick follow-up semi-auto functions of the trigger. So the first thing you want to do when you install it is you want to do that functions check. Put the super safety on safe, pull the trigger, the weapon should not fire. The hammer shouldn't drop. Then put the super safety on fire, pull the trigger, the hammer should drop. Now, while maintaining rearward pressure on the trigger, pull the hammer back, recocking it, allowing the disconnector to hold the hammer, slowly let go of the trigger, and you'll hear the reset of the disconnector letting go of the hammer and the front trigger sear now stopping the hammer from firing the weapon. Now with the hammer recocked, you put the super safety into the super safety position, which is in the middle, pull the trigger, the hammer should fall. Now while maintaining rearward pressure on the trigger, pull the hammer back, recocking it, and now the disconnector is again holding the hammer. Move the lever of the super safety to the rear, and when the super safety moves to the rear, it will push the trigger forward, resetting your trigger, and you'll hear a click, and you'll see the hammer move to where the trigger sear is now holding the hammer from falling. After installing your trigger, if this functions check works like I showed you here, then you shouldn't have to worry about that issue coming up. Now with the blowback AR-9, as long as you have a good resetting trigger and super safety, for the most part it should be plug and play. Pop it in and go to town. Now the issues that pop up with putting this super safety in an AR-9 is the bolt carrier. So there's two types of AR 9mm bolts. There's the one piece and then there's the two piece. Both can be used with the super safety, but they both need to be modified. With the one piece, you can either completely knock out the roll pin here and take the weight out, like I did with this one piece bolt carrier from Odinworks, or with the two piece bolt carriers like from Aero Precision, you have to Dremel out the bottom area there, where the rear piece attaches to the main bolt carrier. Hog out some material to allow the super safety to fit in there. Once that's done, the two piece carrier should work. These 9mm blowbacks are made to have that weight in the back. So you can either take the weight out, hog out some material to let the super safety lever function like it should and put it back in, kind of like the two piece 9mm bolt, or in my case, I have a Law Tactical folder, which comes with that adapter to allow for the folding stock, right? And that adapter fits into the back of the bolt carrier group. So that pretty much substituted the weight that was in the bolt carrier in the first place. So I just knocked the roll pin out and removed the weight altogether. Now with the blowback ARs here, you want a little bit more weight because with the blowback function, you need mass to delay the bolt from coming back too early. And if it comes back too early, you're gonna have a out of battery detonation, and that's not gonna be good. So you can substitute weight with getting a heavier buffer, or adding a heavy buffer along with the Law Tactical adapter. Now when it comes to AR-15 rifles or pistols, or even short-barreled rifles, as long as you have a correctly functioning super safety and trigger, it's come down to gas system and the buffer weight chosen. Now for me here on this 16-inch basic bitch build that I put together during COVID, it has a correctly functioning super safety with trigger, so it resets right. It has a regular standard carbine buffer in it, and it was literally a plug and play. And I think it's all about the gas system. From my experiences, the longer the gas system, like mid-length or rifle, the less weight you need for your buffer. So the shorter you go, the heavier buffer you may need. Now here's another weight related problem. I've seen a lot of guys actually have this problem where they throw it in, they think their gas system and buffer and all that is cycling perfectly, and when they put the super safety in, they realize that they have issues. They'll put it in super safe mode and they'll pull the trigger and it'll get 3 to 4, maybe 5 rounds that'll pop off and then nothing. And when they look at the round that's in the chamber, it's got like a little light primer strike. Now, I wouldn't consider that a light primer strike. I would just consider that inertia of the firing pin just nicking the primer, because it's not, of course, heavy enough to detonate the primer. And then they'll reload those rounds that had the light primer strike, and then their rifle will again go for another 3 or 4 rounds. Now, the reason why this is happening, it's called bolt bounce. So guys with just a regular semi-automatic AR-15, they might be actually experiencing bolt bounce, but they don't see it because they're not firing fast enough. And with this super safety resetting the trigger for you, allowing you to fire fast enough, you are seeing that bolt bounce. So the easy fix is just to get a heavier buffer. So the bolt bounce, you got the bolt cycling back to the rear, and you got the buffer and the buffer spring applying pressure, right? And then the buffer spring and the buffer starts to move the bolt forward. When the bolt reaches all the way into battery, sometimes the bolt can bounce backwards if there's not enough weight in the buffer. A lot of buffers, they have space in there. It's not a complete solid buffer, and it acts like a dead blow. The weight of the buffer will push the bolt carrier into battery, but the 3 weights inside the buffer are towards the rear because of the forward momentum. And then once the bolt reaches battery and everything stops, the weights inside the buffer slam forward to keep the bolt carrier in battery. If you get a heavy buffer, make sure it's not a solid buffer, because that might not do the trick. What you need is a buffer that has room inside of it, and those weights can move, and those weights are going to act like a dead blow. Now, another issue guys run into is the lower receiver, whether or not the super safety can function correctly. Now with that, you're going to need a lower receiver that has an open pocket or trigger well. So if you don't have an open pocket or trigger well here inside of the lower receiver, you're going to have to remove material there. Now this could be achieved by setting up in a mill, or you can do it, the bubble way. Go get a Dremel, put it in a vise, and go to town. It's up to you, your skill level, and the access you have to tools. Another issue guys can have is the travel between the bolt and the lever while cycling. Now the end of the lever here is bent, and that's so that the bolt carrier can ride over top of it when it's traveling to the rear and resetting your trigger. But sometimes the bolt carrier is traveling a little bit too far, and it can get stuck on the top ledge of the lever here. And if that's your problem, where the bolt carrier is getting stuck to the rear, you can again do one of 2 things. The first is you can increase your buffer weight or get a stiffer buffer spring. And what that's going to do is that's going to stop the bolt from going rearward too far. Or a simpler and more cost-effective way, instead of going and buy a new spring and buffer and all that stuff, you can take some quarters, stick them down a buffer tube, and what that does is it takes away some of the space there, not letting the bolt carrier move as rearward as it usually does, getting stuck on the top of that lever. Now, I don't know if I've been lucky, because I think there's only one of my ARs that I needed to tune up to get it to run. I don't think I was lucky in that most of mine are just drop in and go have fun at the range. Most of my builds, I put a lot of thought into them and what I need to get them to function correctly. The main thing is the gas system and the buffer system. So the gas system, buffer, that's all like, one system, cycling, right? If you get them tuned correctly for the rifle to operate normally with a nice ejection pattern and all that, right? A nice recoil impulse. Most of the time, you're going to get a plug and play installation. It's guys that have rifles that are overgassed or undergassed, or have the wrong buffer spring, buffer weight combination. That's usually when you run into problems. And then if you don't adjust your gas system, then you're going to have to mess around with the buffer weight and the buffer spring tension. An easy way to make sure your gas system is set up correctly, the main thing you could do is get a barrel that's dimpled for your gas block. Now, the better manufactured barrels that are coming out are coming with at least 1 dimple, at least that I've seen. But if the barrel comes with 2, that's even better. Now, if the barrel that you have doesn't have any dimples, you can get a dimpling jig, and I have a video on how to dimple your rifle on my channel. It's pretty easy. Put the jig in there, line it up, drill the little divots into the barrel underneath, and what that does is make sure that the gas port in the barrel is perfectly lined up with the gas port in the gas block. And like with all of my builds, personally, I use an adjustable gas block. The more simple the gas block is, I think the better, because then you have less chance of having a malfunction with the gas block, whether it be the adjustments won't adjust because there's too much carbon built up, or if it just flat out breaks. Now, I've had really good luck with the SLR Rifle Works Sentry gas blocks, and pretty much if I have a rifle that I built, it has a Sentry adjustable gas block on it. And of course, get the set screw version so that you can set them in the barrel correctly and get that those gas ports lined up the right way. I think the only rifle that I don't have an adjustable gas block is that basic bitch build that I did during COVID. I just had a gas block, not adjustable, laying around. It was a set screw version, dimpled the barrel, set it up, and it runs flawlessly, especially with that super safety in there. So one more thing I wanted to address with this part 2, I guess, of the super safety videos is its legality. Okay, so I've had a lot of people either comment or message me saying, hey man, the ATF is rated Twin Bros for making those, so you might want to watch out. And then I just got to let them know, like, actually no, the ATF did not rate Twin Bros for the super safety. The Twin Bros was rated for other issues that weren't pertaining to the super safety. So when it comes to the super safety, I know that force reset triggers, the FRTs, and like the wide open trigger, the ATF went after them for their legality and wanted to call them machine guns. Okay, in a sense, the super safety is, I guess, quote unquote, more legal than a FRT. You're gonna ask, well, how's a super safety more legal than a force reset trigger? And the answer is simple, and it all breaks down to the disconnector and its function. So when it comes to the definition of a semi-automatic rifle or a semi-automatic trigger group versus like a full auto trigger group or a burst trigger group, a semi-automatic trigger group is semi-automatic if it lets one round go with every function of the trigger. And when it comes to function, that term, legally, it's a bunch of different things that happen in the cycle of a weapon. So when you pull the trigger, it releases the hammer falls, the round is fired, the bolt recocks the hammer, but the first thing to catch the hammer is the disconnector. And as you're holding the trigger back, it's not going to let that hammer release until you reset the trigger. And with that reset, that's a complete function of a semi-automatic trigger. When you pull the trigger again and release that hammer, that's a separate function. So it's going to fire another round, right? Well, it all comes down to that disconnector. Now remember when I talked about, a full auto group function versus a semi-automatic fire group function? That disconnector in a full auto fire control group is different than a semi-automatic disconnector. And the difference is that little tail in the back. The little tail on the disconnector, when you rotate that safety selector to full or burst or whatever, right? That little tail is getting depressed by the cam on the safety selector. It pushes down on that tail, pulling the hook of the disconnector back. And it's pulling the hook back far enough so that it cannot engage the hammer and hold it in place. So there's no disconnector really that's working in a full auto trigger group when you have it in full auto. In the semi-automatic trigger group, you have that disconnector, and that disconnector is always holding the hammer back before you can fire another round. So when it comes to the force reset triggers, if you look at the internals of the force reset trigger, they don't have a separate disconnector that's actually going to engage the hammer and hold it. And I think that's the reason why the ATF went after those triggers and not the super safety. The super safety forces the reset of the trigger, but it still maintains that separate function of the disconnector that's included in the whole function of a semi-automatic trigger group. Now, there's a super safety manufacturer that I go to all the time. All my super safeties have been good from them. When I first started getting super safeties, when they were, first coming out, there was a couple of guys that I was, getting them from. But then I found D's Nuts Tactical, and he's my go-to manufacturer now. And now I know there are quite a few manufacturers that have their super safeties out, and they have a good reputation as well. Now, I can't go over, where you should go on the internet to get these, from D's Nuts. You guys know I got a website, and I got my videos on there. I got my morale patches on there, and you could find a way, as you can see, I guess.
Got him!
But I think that's it for this video. So if you liked it, throw a like on it. And I'm actually uploading shorts every day now. I have an AI program that cuts all my long form videos up into YouTube shorts, and they get posted on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok every day, I think at like 4 o'clock Central Time. And then I'll be uploading the long form, the longer videos, the explanation videos or, the shooting videos. I'll be uploading them, every so often, like every couple weeks, hopefully. But that's pretty much it. So I'll see you guys next time.